Hi, welcome to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, live version. I'm Tracy Stuckrath, your host, founder of Thrive Meetings and Events. On this podcast, we talk to experts in all facets of food and beverage to help us all learn more about food and beverage and how important it is to our food system and to our lives. On today's show, we are going to talk about the trends for 2021. What's going to be on our plate, what's going to be in our how we're going to eat it. And I've got these two fabulous experts from one across the pond, Mark Cooper, the CEO of IACC, and he and his team of food and beverage experts have devoured some food and beverage trends on what we're going to see. And then Felicia Trujillo, she is the founder of Food Scene, a Raleigh-based creative marketing agency that specializes in food and beverage. And she and her team, from what I see on LinkedIn and Facebook, are all over what's going on and what we're going to see on our plates. So hello, Felicia. Hello, Mark.
Hello.
Hello, Tracy. Hi.
Hi. So glad to have you both here. 2020 was a train wreck. 2021, in food and beverage, we're all at home. So a lot of us are eating a lot of, comfort foods, getting back to what we were doing. But do we see that going into 2021? Mark, I know you just had some conversations with your chefs about, service styles, but did they talk about what's going to be on the plates?
Well, they absolutely are. One of the fortunate outcomes for IACC is that we represent 400 venues in 26 countries, and some of those 26 countries haven't closed at all. Take countries like Sweden, Denmark, they've been operating through the pandemic. So although many hotels and venues, and when it comes to events and large gatherings, they did stop, we've got just some examples that we're able to draw upon of where it's continued and people have come back together. So although we're not out of the woods yet, as you say, Tracy, 2021 is still going to have a period of 2, if not 3 months of being severely restricted. We're starting to see the behavioral changes of people when they come back together, and we're going to need to adapt to that.
Yep. And Felicia, what are you seeing?
I think it's interesting because I'm from California, and it's a whole different experience living in California right now as it is living here in Raleigh. I think actually Durham, which is 30 minutes away, 20 minutes away, is living a little bit differently than Raleigh is. I think have always been a little bit more opened up. So with that said, I think some communities are going to dive back into dining out as soon as the weather warms up, and they'll probably start with outdoor dining, and eventually once more and more people are vaccinated and the weather gets warmer and we're now hopefully past this, indoor dining too. I think also there's so much development going on in Raleigh, and it has not been put on hold due to the pandemic. So while some communities may have a lot of closed businesses and not recuperate, I think some communities are going to come back even stronger. And I think our community here in Raleigh is one of those. I already know so many people who had hoped to open a concept prior to COVID that still plan to after COVID, individuals that have pivoted from one type of concept to another. So I'm optimistic for the most part.
Well, that's good. Because we do need these venues to be able to feed us, because we're tired of eating our own foods, I think, sometimes. So Mark, on service styles, you said out of the woods, but I want to jump back into the woods because
I thought you may.
You and I love talking about forest bathing, but pods, and somebody I saw on one of the trends online that we're going to be eating in shipping containers, and
interesting one.
I know. And Felicia, in our pre-show stuff, you were talking about patio eating and a bad experience that you had, that nobody had put out patio seating to help you as you waited in line. But so what kind of service styles do you think that we'll see?
Well, I mean, I had hoped to see now some businesses have stepped up their service. Many businesses have stepped up their service during COVID. But some I have seen are doing the bare minimum to like just get through this and get on the other side. And I think that's a disservice, because in some ways we're forever changed, and in some ways we're dying to get back to the way we were. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, food is about comfort. Food is about being social and having a positive experience. Even if you're a takeaway place, but it's taking time for your customers to get the food, have a nice place for them to sit, or have an umbrella out if it's hot. I mean, these are things that aren't very expensive, that are easy to do to make the situation comfortable, whether we're in a pandemic or not. And I'd like to see concepts, new concepts or existing concepts come out of the pandemic realizing that, and setting themselves apart by creating extraordinary experiences.
Yeah, I agree with that. And Mark, you in your reports that are going to come out later this month, right? The IACC reports, there are some different service styles, and it kind of touches on that line thing, the queue of a buffet, and getting rid of that queue. So can you talk about some service styles that you guys are seeing?
Well, a little bit differently to Felicia. Of course, my world being business events, it's all about groups. So it's groups of that are coming together in a meeting environment, and then they're with other groups at the same venue. So it's not one big mass gathering, and it's not two people. But so really where the trend is going, and we're looking further than, the immediacy of just unlocking and social distancing, we're seeing this real desire to stay within these bubbles. So where we have a group from IBM of 10 people next to a group from Spotify, they want to be in the same venue, but they don't want to be crossing at the break station or at the, at lunchtime. So in a business event venue, just like, in a restaurant venue for Felicia, you had these great big restaurants that everybody would come together and have the typical conference buffet. Very efficient. 80% of your total audience would have that type of lunch. 20% might have private buffet in the meeting room, or, a barbecue outside, or something different.
Right.
It's going to flip. It's going to be 80-20 the other way around. So really for venues and business event organizers, it is going to absolutely be about how can we cater for these small groups in different parts of the building, or indeed outdoors. Now, shipping container is way out there, but it doesn't surprise me that anybody who's looking at a space or an item that can provide shelter and a roof and be invested in and make it funky and make it creative, why not? Why can't that be a great area to go and have lunch for your group of 10 people if it's set up and it's made to be attractive? So yes, we're going to see more bubbles. We're also going to see more examples of, for instance, the private chefs. So groups asking to have private waiting staff and chefs just to look after their lunch, a little bit like a la Swiss ski type sort of chalet, having your own team that are there. That can actually elevate the meetings experience as well for the attendees and those who are dining. So, if you look at that compared to being in a large restaurant with 300 people in, of course, it's going to be a nicer experience. So industry is going to be investing more in being able to cater for these bubbles and doing it in a way that the experience is enhanced from maybe what it was before. That's the plus side.
Yeah. And I think whether it's in a restaurant or in that venue, that experience level does need to be elevated, because people are worried about the safety and sanitation. People are worried about being around people that they don't necessarily know, and combining those things. And how can you make that safe?
Well, that's a really good point, because I think one of the challenges for our industry is that you will have different groups of people, whether that's private or in a business environment. They have different levels of appetite to risk, or PPE. So you've got to communicate very clearly. You may have a minimum standard for your venue or your restaurant, but then you might have groups of people who are taking it above that. And as long as one group understands what the other group's doing, and that you're not violating them because of those differences, then you're okay. But if you don't make that clear, then those different standards that are being invoked by a company or by a group of people, could cause issues.
Yeah. And it's more than just, hey, don't eat off of my buffet that we used to meeting planners complain about. You know, Mark is going to eat off of Felicia's buffet. It's a lot more difficult than that.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about what's going to be on our plate. And I was scouring a zillion different lists of what's in, you know, what's going to be in trends this year. And, you know, a lot of it comes down to plant-based and sustainability and healthiness. Felicia, can you touch on that a little bit, knowing that you're in that food and beverage market?
Well, I mean, food continues to change, but so does people's perception of food and how they want to consume it. When we moved to Raleigh 7 years ago, there was like one vegan restaurant, you know, and now, but coming from LA, I mean, every other restaurant, I mean, it was just, you could find so many healthy options and vegetarian options and alternative options and locally. So, I mean, there were so many farmers markets, and obviously California agriculture is amazing. Here, I've seen that change a lot in the last several years. And I think that's a great example of, sustainable eating, locally sourced, vegetarian, plant-based, kind of spreading out from the big metropolitan cities into smaller communities. And it's great. And I think it's going to continue to grow. I think people have so much access to information, and therefore they have information in terms of health and quality of life, especially in the circumstance we've been in the last year. Health is forefront of our mind. So incorporating that into how we're consuming food and what we're consuming and where our food is coming from, I think it's going to be more important to people than ever. And I'm excited by that. I love decadent food, but I love healthy food too. So I love to see that there's just more options for people, and for people to be educated and informed that there are so many options, and it doesn't have to be out of touch. It doesn't have to be unaffordable. And I think the more present it becomes, it'll become more attainable and more affordable, and not as scary for people too.
Right. Yeah. And one of the things too is like technology has really played a forefront in our food system, you know, putting it in through TikTok and through Instagram. And there was a whole article the other day on the New York Times about how social media has really opened up chefs' worlds to sharing what they're making.
Right.
And putting more people, we were foodie fanatics with our cameras before. I think it's even more so now, where chefs are showing what they're doing at home. Mark, on that note, I mean, I know Murray Hall in Toronto is plant forward focused. Do you see that across all of your chefs are being more local and sustainable and plant forward?
Absolutely. Murray is a specialist, not only from Canada, but worldwide, in terms of really not only promoting the benefits of plant forward, but designing plant forward into your menu inclusive planning. And as you change, we talked about changing service styles, you do have to adapt. If you're going to do anything that reduces the choice that you have. So we talked about buffets, and Felicia is talking about the changes, you know, in terms of vegan foods and those styles. Well, if you're reducing the choice, you've got to be better at making sure you make the right decisions, you know, on behalf of your clients and the group that you've got coming. Do I see more of it? Yes, I do. But I think sometimes that's linked more to enhancing the experience. When people come back to live meetings, it's going to be more of a treat. They won't be attending maybe as many meetings for a while, at least, that they used to. It's not, oh, I've got to go to another meeting. It's going to be, way, I'm going to a meeting. You know, they're going to be really excited to go back wherever that is, whether it's regional, national, or international. So what we do in relation to the type of food that we put in front of them, even thinking about, let's make sure it's food that people aren't necessarily going to be cooking at home. It's not going to be the comfort foods that they've been used to doing. They're going to be looking for menus, ingredients, and foods that are different as they come out of it. And you're looking at somebody here who is in the UK. We haven't had a single restaurant open since October in the whole of our country. So I have not dined out from a takeaway, you know, since that time. And that's, you know, the world that many of us are living in outside the United States. So it's going to be a big bang when it comes back.
Well, and it's Felicia, go ahead.
I was just that just sounds so awful. That's what I mean. I think so many people feel this. Some people have started cooking more since COVID, but I mean, I don't want to eat anything in my house ever. Ever again. But that's the great thing about going out, whether it is to a conference or to a restaurant, is the anticipation of having something that you couldn't make at home. And I think that's what makes dining out so nice, in addition to the social component.
Yeah, definitely. And, Mark, it is going to be much different because, we were talking before we got on here that I've dined out twice in the last week, and I had 2 different levels of service experience, but our restaurants haven't shut down. But in other parts of the United States that they have. And so even within the US, we've had a different experience, probably not as much as you have had, but yeah, it is gauging how each of those people that are going to walk through your door as a meeting or as a restaurant, and how they're going to engage in that experience is we all have to be prepared to address.
Yeah, I think we need to be very alert when we welcome guests back in whatever environment to those changes in behaviours and preferences, because there will be some that we anticipate, and we've got the time to do it now, and we're starting to see it. There are others that are going to follow that we have no clue about, and we'll be saying, why didn't we see that coming? So we're going to have to monitor, watch, get feedback, adjust a heck of a lot in 2021 from whatever position we're starting in. I agree. One of the other points you mentioned was food waste as well. And I just want to point out, maybe amongst all of this confusion, there are some real positives. So we saw coming out of originally Scandinavia, this move to pre-packaged breaks, refreshment breaks, morning and afternoon, so that people could just pick it up and move through that service part really quickly. And what we saw was, people could pick that up and they moved to the outdoors and away from the big volume areas where people tended to congregate. So that was good from a health and well-being perspective. But also the amount of food being thrown away reduced significantly. So if we can hold on to some of these changes and have a positive impact on the areas we knew the industry was not as good as it could be at, like food waste, then we're going to get some real pluses that we can carry through into the future. Food apps you mentioned about is the other one. When you're ready to talk about those, I think they can add to us better calculating what the consumption needs are going to be and reduce our food waste as well.
Wholeheartedly. And Felicia, one of the terms that I saw on the list of all the trends was upcycling. And that is like using all of the parts of animals and all the parts of the vegetables. Are you seeing that in the restaurant? I mean, the restaurant side, like using carrot tops and, other things to make.
Yes, you see that in restaurants, but you see that in specialty restaurants and high-end restaurants. You're not seeing that in fast casual restaurants and chains and
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's just scratch kitchen kind of experiences, which I hope, and that's the ones that we want to survive more so than we want, other ones to survive. We want them all to survive, but I would really love scratch kitchens to survive.
Again, though, what you're doing is tapping into individuals' social awareness that is heightened through this pandemic. Small things have become really important to us, and protecting our planet is something that's really close. It's closer to our heart than it was even coming into this pandemic. So it's not about whether our venues and our kitchens and our teams and our brands are adopting these principles. It is about that, but it's about whether they're talking about it, whether they are making it part of their DNA and their culture and communicating that outwards to the consumer or the attendee at the event, because there are so many examples of great things happening, but the attendee doesn't know about it.
Exactly. Yep. And we have to share that so that they know, what we are doing, and that even jumps into safety and, the safety side of all of this, because a survey I did last year for Exhibitor magazine was, I asked the attendees of my webinar, I'm like, how many of you had asked about food safety practices before COVID? And 71% of them said never. And now that's going to be the other way around, I think. But food safety was always there. we just never talked about. Restaurants and convention centers never really talked about what they did food safety wise or just sanitation wise. And I think that's going to really turn that conversation around. And we have to be more transparent about what we're doing and offering.
We're protecting, we as an industry are not only there to protect and give that sense of confidence to our guests, we have to protect our employees, because our employees are returning, coming back into an industry after not working for a year, many of them.
Right.
They're going to come with their own baggage in regards to, what their sense of safety and comfort level. So it's no good putting out, somebody to serve 100 people with tea and coffee and not think about their needs as you're doing it, as you're just saying that service style is fine. Well, it's not if you're subjecting an individual and an employee to having to stand right in front and serve tea and coffee to 100 different individuals. And we've seen with some of the early days PPE standards, you talk about whether you mask the employee or you mask the attendee, what's the most important. Why are we even asking that question? The two are critical in terms of their feelings and their comfort levels. Otherwise, we won't be able to serve that tea and coffee in the future.
Felicia, I know you mentioned that to me before the show too, about, like in your husband's restaurant as well, that service level of safety for the employees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and this even goes before COVID. I mean, if you ever dined at a restaurant that had sticky floors or sticky menus, nobody wanted that. And now it's nice because not only is that beyond unacceptable, I think cleanliness and safety will be front of mind. And that, regardless of what's going on in the world, that just always makes a guest feel more comfortable.
Right. Exactly. All right. So let's jump to technology. Felicia, a lot of this whole time, a lot of restaurants have switched to QR codes to look at their menus and take it online and making sure that their ingredients are known. And Mark, you've mentioned it too. Where do you see technology leading us in the food and beverage world, as with people having apps on their phone, not just social media stuff?
I see there's still improvements that need to be made because I've experienced some major debacles when it comes to online ordering. Not so much on the to-go where you're sitting at your desk and you order food and you go pop down to the restaurant and pick it up. But I've been in a restaurant, like, for example, I was at a restaurant and even though there were servers present, they were like, pull up the menu online, order online. But if you have different checks, then it's a whole different thing. Well, half of our group got all their food. The other half, the order never went to the kitchen.
Oh, wow.
So, then we're waiting and we're like, okay, it's been a while. Something's wrong here. So we had to wait and call somebody over. The other group had finished eating their food. Then we put the food in. We get our food. And then bill, we all close out and I have the order twice on my phone. Now we have to get somebody. So I think, that there still needs to be a human element. I've never liked the idea of sitting at a restaurant and ordering food on an app, especially a more fine dining restaurant. I love the experience of having a paper in my hand, reading through it, talking to the wait staff that knows how to pair wine, or they can make recommendations, or if you have questions about food allergies or whatever it is. There's this interactive experience that I think people are still going to want when it's appropriate. And then there's the implementation of technology when, you're in the middle of a workday, you just want to get food and get out. Like, that makes sense. But there's still hiccups. And there's hiccups, especially with like food halls where they have multiple stalls. You have to order from, let's say you're in a car with your family and everybody wants something different. You literally have to place 4 orders, close the app, go to each station or go to one thing and cull through, as opposed to one singular ordering system. Everyone gets paid out on the back end. The customer's not worried about it. The food's ready. So I think the technology will improve for sure. I just hope that it doesn't take over customer service.
That's a good point. That's a really good point. And Mark, how can that be applied? I mean, because we're going to serve larger groups of people, at a meeting, but we have event apps, but we've never really used them to order food. And are your chefs amenable to me, you, the three of us ordering our food separately on an app to say, hey, we're coming? Or what's the technology looking like?
Well, first of all, if we can use that technology to feed 45,000 people in a football stadium where there's 15 minutes between the first half and the second half, it can be done for a meeting for 100, right? So
Right.
we know it exists and we've seen efficiencies in doing it. I'm coming at it from a totally opposite, I guess, perspective to Felicia. And it's not that I disagree with Felicia, but dealing with groups and business meetings, it's about efficiencies. So as an attendee to a meeting, if I get to know what is going to be available on my morning break, and I can see that on my phone before I get to the morning break, I've made my decision beforehand. I can pick it up, it's efficient, and I can walk away. Doesn't mean there's less choice to be able to do it. So no, it doesn't exist at the moment. It may do in a very bespoke situation, but all of the examples I see of pre-ordering are in restaurants and bars and at sporting events and that sort of thing. So I welcome it happening. We're doing some research to find organizations that are switching and developing. So they may have had the app-based hotel room service one absolutely nailed, but we're saying, okay, well, how do you bring that into a conference and meeting environment? The other point is, and the feedback from the chefs and from the food and beverage professional side is, yes, we welcome it as long as we have enough time to react to the order to then get it out for 100, 200 people. So, as long as the timing works and we get that information in advance, it could be a great thing. And again, it links across to reducing food waste and efficiency, which has got to be a good thing. But it's not there yet, and I look forward to the day it is.
Well, and there's a big difference there too, and I think the Lee brothers did their book. They talked about they became caterers for a little while, and they're like, oh my gosh, this is so much harder work. Not necessarily harder, but such different work than working in a restaurant. And when you have to put out dinners for 200 people at the exact same time versus 200 covers for a night, that is a completely different experience in how you do it. And the customization of those event menus is a lot harder than when I'm going into a restaurant and saying, okay, hey, I need a gluten-free, dairy-free one, kind of on the spot. So it's a much different experience. And hopefully that we can get that technology, that can mesh those two together, because it's food and beverage.
Now it's not. Before COVID, it was a question of whether it made sense from a financial investment perspective. Now it's a much bigger question of whether it allows you to be a viable business and come back. So the sense of urgency and the willingness to invest in that area, because everyone needs to do it, is there today where it wasn't in the past. And that might mean that the cost of food and the experience goes up, but it also might mean that the experience is heightened and it's a lot better. So I think we have that opportunity now, and I hope we take it and not just fall back into the old way of doing things just because we can.
Right. Okay.
Go ahead. I was just going to add to that. I think the cost of food and the experience has to go up. Because if we're going to implement additional safety and wellness, and we're going to source locally or better quality food, or we're going to implement technologies, or we're going to expect the staff to provide exemplary service, everybody has to get paid. And that's where there's a disconnect, especially in the restaurants, where everybody wants to eat for cheap, but they want the best experience and the best food and the best of cleanliness and the best ambiance, but you have to pay. Somebody's got to pay for that. The profit margins for restaurants is so minimal to begin with.
Well, and that's a whole nother conversation to have, because one of the other trends that I found too is, making sure there's accountability for the restaurant side as well as for all of our staff, and ensuring that safety and that protection of everybody across the board. And both of you have mentioned that in different pieces of this conversation today, because we have to, ensure the sustainability of the business itself, but also the safety of everybody involved, whether it's from the worker to the eater, everything that comes into play into that. And food and beverage, in a meeting, it is our highest expense. and it unfortunately is going to get higher, but we have to figure out, how can we mesh that with our budgets and understand, to have that service level, we do have to pay more for it. Mark, I thought it was interesting in your report, which is, again, is coming out, is that some of your members tried to do the COVID charge and got, service charge and got backlash from that, from planners, but, raising their rates a little bit, it was not really seen.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the wrong way of doing it. It's trying to call it out and call it a COVID surcharge. It's as popular as a resort fee that you get on your hotel bill when you've been to Las Vegas. It never is going to go down well. But it's interesting, you talk about the cost of food and beverage going up, but actually, aren't we seeing the value of the food and beverage component going up as well? Yes. As soon as you take something away from somebody, as soon as you can't dine in a restaurant, as soon as you can't put on a meeting because you can't dine together and you have to sit 2 meters away from your fellow attendee, then you realize the value that had beforehand that you took for granted. So yes, I think it will go up. And I'm sure, though, we will find efficiencies in other ways as we move forward. But like I say, if it's happening to everybody, then at least you're not on your own putting that price up. If everyone's doing it because everyone has to, then it becomes, a lot easier to do, maybe.
Yeah, and I agree about not putting that line item in there, because then it's like, has the neon sign, like, what is this extra charge?
Yeah, definitely. And if you can do it across the board, it's like one chef in Vegas, and this was years ago, he's like, well, can't I charge for using that gluten-free toaster? And I'm like, it's the cost of doing business. You take the cost of that $10 toaster and you apply it across the board to all of your costs, and then you've paid for it, right? You don't want to keep charging every single time somebody uses that toaster. Yeah. Okay, so where are we? We're at 32 minutes into this conversation. What food do you want to see on your plate when you go back to a meeting, Mark?
Oh my word, you didn't prepare me for that one. What
did
food
not.
do I want to see? I want to see food that has been sourced locally, that has reduced food miles, that has been well thought out by the chef, and it is thinking of my health and well-being more so than in the past. That's going to be important. I also think it goes back to that original point. I want to see something I haven't seen before, and I know that's easy to say, but I'm used to what I've been used to in the last year from dining from home, as wonderful as some of that's been, but I want to try new things. So I'll be looking for cuisines and fusion cuisine as well when I return. But more importantly than anything on my plate, I want to be talking to the person opposite me and reigniting that relationship and and getting the value from that. Food for me is important, but it's the glue that knits all of the relationship building and the experience together.
That's awesome. And what about you, Felicia? Can you see me? Okay, there it goes.
Yeah.
It was black on my end. Yeah, I mean, I'm not a vegetarian, but I always order my entrees based upon the sides, because I love vegetables and I love grains, and I love how chefs can prepare them in so many ways that I would never imagine or even attempt at home. So I would love to see more plant-based foods on menus incorporated in with protein, so that, if you go with a group, there's something for everybody. Mm-hmm. But I always get excited when I see a vegetable or something thoughtful that I haven't seen before, prepared in the same way before. And also, to echo Mark's sentiments, I mean, I'm like half introvert, half extrovert, and I've maxed out my introversion. I am now like, I'm ready. I'm so ready to walk into a restaurant, see it filled with people I know, get together with groups on a regular basis. And I love connecting people. And I do that, we all do that on social media, but it's so nice to fulfill and finish those connections in person and travel. And food, is such a great accompaniment to that.
Well, and it reminds me of when you met somebody on Twitter or Facebook and you meet them in person somewhere. You're like, oh my God, I'm finally putting a real face to a name that's online. And that's what we're all doing. All right. So one little twist from what both of you just said, because there's been a lot of cooking demos and a lot of beverage demos and tastings online. Is there anybody that you followed or that you've participated in an online cooking or beverage demo?
Well, that's an easy one for me, because the one person that I followed the most on Instagram and I found to be really inspiring is the executive chef of the Purple Pig in Chicago, Jimmy Bagno, I want to say Jr. That place, I've had the privilege of sitting at the bar and watching the team cooking behind the bar. I mean, it's just phenomenal. It's like being at the theater watching those guys, but actually just watching him and then go through the journey of dealing with the pandemic in the early days, helping their communities, going from full restaurant to takeaway. You talked about ghost kitchens or whatever. I mean, they've taken the whole journey and been so impressive. So yeah, Jimmy Bagno Jr. from Purple Pig in Chicago on Instagram gets my vote.
Okay, awesome. Felicia, what about you?
I have a terrible answer. In my stages of denial of COVID and the changing of the world, I've actually avoided Zooms and videos and all the things as much as possible, because I just felt like every time there was you watched somebody doing a cooking thing or a mixology thing, or let's do Zoom game night. For me, it was just a reminder that life wasn't normal. And so I would choose to do something with my kids or get a new cookbook or just kind of do something internally and with the family, or have our next door neighbors over. It was really important for me to not dive into embracing technology, especially too, because I run a digital marketing agency. We spend a lot of time on social media. I really, and kids being on virtual, I really didn't allocate more screen time.
No, I like that idea. And okay, so what cookbook have you loved the most?
Well, I recently purchased one of the Ottolenghi vegetarian cookbooks.
Okay.
Which was actually really overwhelming, because there was I wanted to make every recipe in the book. So I was I don't even know where to start. But then also one cookbook that I always go back to, a shameless plug, is Southern Smoke, because I photographed it, but also because it was created by a local, not chef, because he wouldn't even call himself a chef, but Matthew Register. But also all the dishes in there were super relatable, and you can cross-pollinate with your ingredients, and the kids, everyone in my house was happy with the recipe from the book. So that was something that I revisited a lot over the last year.
All right. Very cool. Well, thank you both very much. And I guess I was going to say one more parting thing. What do you foresee? What are you excited about for food and beverage in 2021? Just to say goodbye.
I just can't wait to get out there. Sun to shine, warm weather. People are at the restaurants. I see faces I haven't seen in a while.
Okay.
Yeah, that's social connection more than anything.
Mark?
Mine can only be the simplicity of seeing meetings return and people getting back together for business events, large or small, because it isn't happening the way it should. So it's just returning to us being able to say that there is no one country, no one state locked down, and we are all on that road to recovery. So yeah, it's pretty straightforward.
Well, thank you both so much. I mean, and the trends for 2021 vary in a variety of different topics, from service and sustainability and staffing. And I think we covered them all today. So I so appreciate your openness and your expertise in this. And I hope we had a good following here today. So I hope everybody got something out of that. You have been listening to the Eating at a Meeting podcast, live broadcast. We are here every Wednesday at 12 o'clock Eastern, and you can catch us after the fact on all podcast platforms. Check us out, the Eating at a Meeting podcast. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Thanks, Tracy.
Thank
you, Tracy.
Thanks.
Awesome as always. Thank you.
Oh, you're sweet. Thanks. All right, let's end.